All right, so today, talking about racism. I know this is a sensitive topic, this is a hot button topic, but it's one as I'm doing this series and thoughts for the church. Thought, man, this is probably something really important that we get a good grasp on and handle on. So here's what I'm going to do. Actually, the next couple of videos are going to be actually really kind of talking about the definitions of words and helping the church understand what certain words actually mean, because words do matter, and we can't just make them say whatever we want them to say. They have meaning, and we don't get to decide the meaning of those words. And so let me read. This is dictionary definition. You look up in a dictionary, this is what you'll find, at least a current dictionary of racism. A belief or doctrine that inherent differences among the various human racial groups determine cultural or individual achievement, usually involving the idea that one's own race is superior and has the right to dominate others, or that a particular racial group is inferior to others. Or a short definition is hatred or intolerance of another race or other races. So here's kind of how I want to frame this. There are generally two sides, generally speaking. All right, I'm not trying to capture everybody here, but there are generally two sides to this that people tend to take. The first is kind of to want to push racism aside and not actually talk about it, and kind of the media's made it overblown and made it a bigger deal than it is, and some people would probably say that it's a outright not a big deal and not a real thing. And so that's one side, and the other side is this you kind of just jump fully on board with the conversations of race and dealing with racism, and you the term that's usually used is woke, and you just jump right in and dive into that, and that's the other side of this. And in doing that, we've made it a black versus white kind of issue, and that's just not the case. And so here's kind of what I want to address today. This country has a long history of hatred. So if you're on the side of this doesn't exist, we dealt with this in the civil rights movement and the Civil War and all of that, this in the past, it's not real anymore. I think you kind of have to foolishly brush aside our nation's history to not see that hatred for another person has kind of just been at the very beginning and woven into the fabric of this country. You don't have to do a deep dive into our history to kind of see that. And if you think that just because of some movement or a war that was fought, that stuff just kind of magically went away and disappeared, I think you're kidding yourself, and I think you're lying to yourself a little bit, and maybe because of how the media portrays it, you're a little tired of it and you're sick of it and you think it's just way overblown, and to an extent that might be true, but if you think that we're not wounded by our past and we don't have any more healing to do and any more growth to do in these areas, again, I think you're foolishly kidding yourself. We don't represent Christ well when we refuse to call evil evil. If you can't just call something evil without saying yeah but, then I think you're kind of missing the point of all of this. And you don't represent Christ well when you ignore the plight and you ignore the difficulties of 12 to 13 million image bearers in this country. You just can't. It is a little infuriating to me. Gets me going a little bit when people will just say this is outright, this is not a big deal at all. Hatred of another human being for the way that they look absolutely is a huge deal. It is absolutely evil, and we as the church, at the very least, ought to be able to call evil evil. We hold to a belief system that actually purports that, allows us to do that. And so that's the one side where you can kind of just ignore what's going on. And then there's the other side of this is that you become a foolish sheep. You become foolish in trying to ignore that these things exist in our country and they're still real. And you become a foolish sheep and you begin talking about these things like the media wants you to, and how they dictate it, and how the loud minority, as I like to call it, likes to dictate the conversation. Be very careful, I think, about assuming white guilt. There's the assumption if you're white, you're guilty of racism. You just are. Because of the way and it's the same thing, because if we would judge a black person or Latino or Asian or somebody like that based on what they look like, we do the same thing. When you jump right into this kind of wokeism and this woke belief system, be very careful about jumping on board with these ideologies. It's not about ideologies. Be very careful with jumping on board with the Black Lives Matter organization. You need to do some serious homework if you're going to be a Christian and partner yourselves with organizations that further evil and further injustice and talk about justice, but don't have any idea what that actually means to pursue justice. When you do things like assume white guilt and yell at white people and yell at white evangelicals like this is all their problem and this is their fault and they need to wake up, you do some things like creating white saviorism. You give us a complex of like, oh, we need to step in and we're the ones who need to fix it. You create tokenism. All right, I need to find a black friend, and that way people can see that I'm diverse and I'm woke. These are all just as evil and hateful as racism itself, and do nothing to further the cause of real justice and create real change. But I would like to suggest to us a better way. The Bible suggests a better way for us. 1 John 3, starting in verse 15, everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or in talk, but in deed and in truth. John's not talking about just not saying anything, but what he's talking about is love causes us to act. It's in love that we do call evil evil and stand up for the oppressed. It's in love that we rebuke and we correct with gentleness and kindness and patience. I would challenge us all to read 1 Corinthians 13 and understand that this is the more excellent way to love as Christ has loved, to love as God has taught us how to love, and not talk about these things, racism in particular, by the ideologies that are being purported and making it black versus white. No, there's hatred going on, very real hatred, evil racism, evil hatred, and it's even systemic as well as on an individual level. And so we need to be the ones speaking out against that. We need to be the ones addressing that as the church. We can't ignore it, but we also can't just jump on these ideologies and think that they're going to be the ones to fix that. In this series, I'll talk a little bit more about, okay, what do we do in regards to actively moving as John tells us to. Don't just speak words of love, but make your words be matched by your actions. And so as we think about racism, hopefully that gives you something to think about, a more excellent way to deal with these things.